Hello, and welcome to the next episode of The Prestige, a podcast about films, filmmaking, and film theory.
In each programme, we'll focus on a particular movie, we're going to review it, talk about it, and discuss some of the ideas and themes it throws up.
As always, we'll end with our recommendations for films to watch following this week's film, and the links can be thematic or director-based or to do with the actors, or pretty much just tenuous if we like, to be honest.
Before all that, who are we and why should you care about what we say? So, my colleague on this podcast is Dr. Sam Knowles. He is a university lecturer, a college lecturer who writes and teaches about books and movies and comics and films and all manner of pop culture through a academic eye. I am Rob Maythorn. I have no doctor status, but I have spent the last 10 years working in the British film industry. I have since retired to Cornwall to take pictures of cosplayers.
Right, but not Cornwall because you're in Shropshire.
Did I say Cornwall? I meant Shropshire.
Yeah, you did.
My parents are in Cornwall. I'm in Shropshire. Similar places.
Yeah. Entirely out of the way.
Yes.
Right, so this week, Rob, it was your turn.
It was my turn, and I picked the 2010 film, The Social Network.
I need to do something substantial in order to get the attention of the clubs.
Why?
Because they're exclusive and fun, and they lead to a better life.
People want to go on the internet and check out their friends, so why not build a website that offers that friends, pictures, profiles?
I'm talking about taking the entire social experience of college and putting it online.
Site got 2,200 hits within 2 hours.
22,000.
Social Network ostensibly is the story of Facebook and how it was founded, but really it's the story of some friends and power plays and political machinations and all of that kind of business, corporate, personal sort of thing that surrounded the founding of Facebook. You've got Jesse Eisenberg playing Mark Zuckerberg, the main founder and inventor of Facebook. You've got Andrew Garfield as Eduardo Saverin, who is his best friend and co-founder. And you see the birth of these guys from living in a dorm room at Harvard all the way through to the mildly infamous court cases that surrounded Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook down the line. It tells the story of the Winklevoss twins, who he was sued by, and it tells the story of when he was sued by Eduardo, his best friend. I know there's a spoiler to give that away, given the film kind of reveals that pretty early. And it's a true story within a given value of true. It's directed by David Fincher. It's written by Aaron Sorkin, and it's based on the book by Ben Mesrich called The Accidental Millionaires. And that's probably as much as you can say without giving it away. It's a very David Fincher film, and it's a very Aaron Sorkin film. There's great support, I think, from Rooney Mara as opposed to the girl that got away.
Mm-hmm.
And great support certainly from, I can't remember his name now, but one actor who played Armand Hammer, who plays both of the Winklevoss twins. I think he does some great support.
I looked this up, actually. He only plays one of them. Like you, I thought he played Cameron and Tyler, but apparently he only played Cameron.
Well, this is the thing. This is where it gets into my world of digital trickery. He played both parts when they needed both parts to be played. So they had an actor who played the body mostly of Cameron.
I see.
And then
he was Cameron.
He played the body of Tyler, and then they, using a 3D rig, basically, they can map his face onto the other actor's face. So
that's cool.
It was played essentially a mixture of traditional split screen, so you film him in one place, film him in another place.
Mm-hmm.
Compositing, where you kind of copy him on top, and then this very high technically way of face mapping it. So when you get a panning shot of both of them, you get a sort of a match. You will notice from a technical point of view that occasionally, and probably more often than not, the other actor is wearing some sort of hat, or is wearing sunglasses, or some sort of bandana. And that's very much to help that process along. Because it's easy to map a face on when you've got a hard edge to it without having to deal with hair and receding hair and all that kind of stuff. So you can often tell that the other brother is wearing some sort of bandana or hat, often to help with that process.
Yeah, right.
It is. I mean, from my point of view, technically, it's technically outstanding. I mean, it's probably the best example of that thing done that I've ever seen. But then I think Fincher is very good at that kind of stuff. Sam, have you seen it before, and what do you think?
I have seen it before, and until this moment I did not know that. So that is the sort of thing that's fascinating. Not that most of the things you say are
fair enough,
pointless, but but that was really interesting. Yes, I have seen it before, and I like it with some reservations.
Okay.
My first note on this was verging on the flippant. Did this film need to be made? I suppose it feels very public domainy, and all the it just seemed fairly obvious. It seemed a story that didn't need to be told because everyone knew it already. That was the thing, and I don't know whether this may be a testament to Jesse Eisenberg, that you just think, well, this isn't really a character. This is just actually this feels like a documentary about Mark Zuckerberg, the way he plays it. But then it went on from that, and I do like lots of the performances are very good. I thought Rooney Mara, if anything, was a bit too good for the role that was written for her.
I can see that.
She stood out as a brilliant actor, and the role felt a bit lightweight, and the character was just a bit of a cipher. And she appears at the end, and you can see that. Well, I think maybe the writers might be trying to suggest that a yearning for the one that got away is something that drives Zuckerberg. I don't think they did that entirely successfully. But yes, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much to reveal about the end of it. But I suppose it's easier with something like this when it's ostensibly a true story anyway.
I mean, I think I'm happy to issue a sort of podcast-wide. We will spoil films occasionally on this podcast.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, the final scene has Eisenberg as Zuckerberg, friend requesting his old flame, and you think that maybe the writers are moving towards the idea that Zuckerberg did all these machinations, as you suggest, with his friends and his colleagues in order to drive at something that was missing in his life, and Erica Rooney Mara is a symbol of this, is something that he was missing, that he's yearning for. I wasn't sure about that. I thought that was a rather sort of hackneyed attempt to sort of after you just had a character say you're trying to be an arsehole, but you're not. Or I can't remember how the
other way around, but yes.
Yes, you're not an arsehole, but you're trying hard to be. It felt that this was the writers sort of trying to hammer home the point in quite a hackneyed way, and I wasn't sure that entirely worked. That device with the friending at the end.
I think just on that note, before we dive into a larger review, I took that to be more about. It wasn't about her, and she was merely the token of the unachievable. That it felt to me the portrayal of Zuckerberg, or the story they're trying to tell here, was that Zuckerberg was this overachiever who got into Harvard, who then discovered that wasn't enough. Getting into Harvard, he had to go beyond that and be in a finals club. And it was all about him achieving and getting that goal, and that's why I think when he lost friends, it didn't matter as much because he'd already got them in the first place. Whereas Rooney Mara and Erica Albright just represented what he couldn't get, But he says infamously in one little speech, he's like, you know what, I could buy the Brazilian club and turn it into my snooker room.
Yeah,
so
and that's not what it's about.
It's not what it's about, and he's got all the money, he's got all the fame, he's got all the reputation, and the one thing he can't get is people who like him.
Yes, I wonder, just going on that, and it's not something I'll come back to as a recommendation because, well, this is quite early on the podcast, and also it's not technically a film, but I noticed in the credits that Kevin Spacey has an executive producer credit, and this did feel very like the beginnings of House of Cards.
Same director.
With this, it was the same director. Oh, yeah, brilliant.
David Fincher, I don't know if he's directed all of them, but he's heavily involved, certainly, in House of Cards.
Right. Did feel very much like that. This central character who's achieved a lot and yet wants more and doesn't quite know how he's going to get it. He just knows he's going to take it.
From my, just for a quick review, because I think obviously I really like this film. I think that aside from the content, the text of the film, it is one of the best examples of modern filmmaking. I think that there are certain scenes in this, notably the early hacking scene, when he hacks into Harvard Facebooks before the Facebook, is as perfect a section of film editing as I've ever seen. The music.
Say what you mean by that.
As in that scene when he starts hacking, he gets home from being dumped by Erica. He starts drinking, he starts blogging, and he basically goes through hacking. And this is the voiceover is him discussing how he's hacking. It's Perl scripts, it's PHP, it's like the hardcore techiness, but it's perfectly balanced with him and two drunken mates hacking, intercut with the scenes of these finals clubs where he wants to be, and you can notice the physicality of the actors playing the finals clubs are very different to the physicality of the actors playing the hackers. The music by Trent Reznor and the editing, it builds, and you get it's almost like an action scene in many ways, and you're swept along in this scene of you get the heartbeat cutting and the music builds you up, and you feel like this kind of this release at the end of it, and it's one of those films like I'm a deep advocate of terrible films, and one of those is a film called Hackers from the 90s, which is terrible. And very rarely does hacking or the kind of computer side of life get portrayed on film well and excitingly. And I think this scene nailed. You care about the fact what he can and can't hack, and you care about, you get the process end to end very quickly, and you get the emotional beat of it, and you get why, in a short section, why it's so popular, what he's done, and what some of the ramifications of it are going to be. And all of that's conveyed basically without much dialogue.
Also, I suppose you get the film peaking, because after that, it's. I suppose I kind of wanted more of a film. I didn't know it was from that scene. You're right to pick up on it, and I hadn't noticed that before. But I suppose I felt I wanted more from this, of the nuts and bolts of what he did, and it felt that after that hacking scene, or after the scene where he gathers interns and he has them doing shots around the table, it felt like those two were sort of, after that the film went downhill, and it was just sort of like, oh, he's doing a bit of hacking or doing a bit of coding, and now we'll have a court case. And I just felt the interesting bits were sort of weighted towards the beginning, because you're right, that is a primary driver behind why he does it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that sort of visually, that scene still stands out. I've seen this film 5 or 6 times now. And it still stands out in my mind as one of the best examples of how to edit in a feature film. And I think that they kind of, for them as filmmakers, that scene served the purpose of setting them up as talented and arrogant, and a bit of a screw up. That's not the story they're trying to tell. They're trying to tell the story of how he can't deal with people, rather than how he can deal with computers.
And but it's something that it loops back to right at the end, which is you get how he can't deal with people, but you also get him thinking, "Oh, how I messed up was saying something."
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just being offensive in a frat boy way. It was being properly offensive about farm animals, and he has this moment where he thinks, "I shouldn't have done that." Right at the end of the film, there's a line, and he says to the advocate, he says, "Yeah, I shouldn't have brought that up." So it's an interesting idea that scene. Not only is that important in the film as a whole, but it's important to the character of Zuckerberg because it comes back, it revisits him.
I think that kind of ties into the central idea I wanted to talk about this week in relation to social network, and that's the idea of truth, which I'm well aware is a huge topic to try and cover in a 15-minute podcast. But so much of this film is based on someone's version of the truth. Ostensibly, almost all the film takes place in deposition hearings, and everything you see apart from the hearings themselves are flashbacks. The opening scene in which him and Erica break up, which you think of as part of the narrative, is then revealed to be the stenographer reading back that instance.
Yeah.
And so much of the stuff happens, and a lot of, the whole drive behind the court case is he said, she said. Whose version of the truth is true? And this, I think, plays into a larger narrative of this film, in that obviously this is based on a true story, but given that Zuckerberg's been with his partner for well before Facebook was started and still with her now, it's to a given value of true. And there are large parts, and both Mark Zuckerberg and as well as Severin have gone on record to say this film isn't true, which, as a film that portrays itself as true, I think it's something interesting to talk about.
I will normally write a line or two when I think of something in the course of the film. I wrote very nearly a whole page about this, the recounting of the scene between Mark and Erica in the bar, because, and that was sort of became clear 10 minutes into the film. What you were saying about this, whose truth is valid, whether it was a narrative or not. So very early on in the film, like you said, you've got a sequence that occurs. This may have taken me a page to write out because I don't really have the vocabulary for it, but it's a sequence that occurs in the film, and yet is also commented on in the film. So, whereas normally you've got part of the finished product that is viewed by the viewer of the film, in this case you've got something that is actually sort of metafilmically part of the experience for the characters in the film.
Yeah,
if you see what I mean.
What you mean, yep.
So this scene is setting something up, sort of undercutting expectations of truth right at the beginning.
I would agree. I think there are several points in that film when you cut back to the depositions, and the first question after a flashback scene is that true? Or is that the case? Or do you recall that? Or I don't recall it that way. And almost everything we see as part of the narrative isn't. It's just someone's version of that narrative. And the film, unlike other films that handle this, things like One Night at McCool's and often very commonly X-Files episodes, we don't see both sides of that story. So we don't see Mark Zuckerberg's version of that scene and the Winklevoss's version of that scene. We just see one version of that scene. And we're left to pick that out. And I think sometimes we see everyone but Mark Zuckerberg's view of the scenes. I mean, I don't want to speak definitively because I can't remember it that in depth, but it feels to me like a lot of the scenes come from his point of view. They don't come from different point. They come from everyone else around his point of view.
Yeah. I was thinking of that scene in which there are lots of those. So this happened and then this happened from all these other people's points of view. And Cy, the lawyer prosecuting him, turns to him and says, "So there's this and this and this, and what do you have to say?" And he doesn't respond. And Cy says, "Don't you think I deserve your attention?" And Zuckerberg's response to that is very telling, because it shows you that part of this idea of not getting Zuckerberg's side of things is a response on the part of the film that's saying to the readers, well, I don't think you should be given all the parts of this jigsaw. I think it should be up to you to do some work putting them together. And that's exactly what Zuckerberg says to Laura. He says, you don't deserve my attention. I'm not concentrating on you. I'm thinking about something else.
I've got bigger fish to fry than this.
And yes, exactly. Yeah, I've got a $1 billion business that needs to be run right now. So you are not important to me.
I think there's also we're getting to the weird metatextual element of most films. In this, we're clearly told very early on that these stories aren't real. This isn't the narrative of the film. This is someone's recollection within the film. It's a film within a film. But as an audience, we still buy into it being true, and we're terrible for this as an audience. I say terrible or easy, but we always buy a film as true. Obviously, in a fictional film, you want the audience to buy into the film. But infamously, Fargo by the Coen brothers says at the start, based on a true story. It is not based on a true story. There is no true story. It's entirely made up. But they put it in there because, as they said, everything else is made up. Why shouldn't that be? And there's this weird kind of contract we have with an audience as a film, in that if it says based on a true story, we expect that to be true. Even though we know that films on a whole are lies. They're all stories. But there are some things like based on a true story, and in a situation like this where it is infamously based on a real person and a real incident, or partially real incidents, we have an expectation of truth from that film, which is misplaced.
And I have to say, although this podcast is teaching me to rewatch films in a different light, I am terrible for that. I will get so sucked into a film, and then it's only if I watch it again, or I watch it from your perspective, or I think about it and come back to it later on, it's only then that I think, oh, actually, I should have thought about a different layer to this. I should have thought about the actuality of the truth here, and I'm so, I just have this real propensity to just think, oh yeah, of course it's true. I'm going to buy into this. So I suppose at times I am the perfect punter for that.
I would agree. I always say it's much easier to critique a bad film because you're out from it. You're step removed from it. And I've really, through my education, had some training in studying film and critiquing film. But even then, genuinely, I had to, even with Social Network, I had to stop and go, you're not watching this as a good film. You're watching this to try and talk about the podcast. And yes, we want to watch films we enjoy, and we want to enjoy watching them. But prepping for this was a very different experience than prepping for just watching a film and enjoying a film. But if it's a bad film, like Sexy Beast last week, I didn't enjoy a lot. I didn't buy into it. It was much easier for me to talk about that film afterwards because I hadn't bought into it.
Yeah. One thing I did want to bring up actually is the way that you'll get echoes, even in the something you mentioned much earlier, the physicality of characters, and you will get echoes. I was just thinking of the way that you see Zuckerberg running a lot, and you see what's his name, Devendra, is it the Winklevoss's friend? You see him running at one point when he discovers something. So you've got these parallel movements, and you seem to get that a lot, sort of echoing in the way people move and the way different stories fit together.
Yeah, and I think that there's I think the director uses physicality a lot, and it's strange that looking at it, I really noticed, especially in the scene when Eduardo confronts Mark about the sort of commercial and corporate ambush he receives, that the physicality of Mark, he just gets smaller and smaller and smaller over the film. If you look at the very last scene we talked about with him, I think it's Rashida Jones from Parks and Rec. He is slumped and hunched over this little chair in a big room. She's standing over him almost the entire scene. And as this film goes on, he just gets smaller and smaller and smaller as a person. And you do very much feel that somehow he's like it's that kind of it's the lonely king. You know, he's obviously king of everything he surveys, but he's never seemed more lonely than he's sitting in a clinically cold, minimalist office, looking at one laptop. You know, he starts in a warm Harvard environment and ends alone and cold.
And that's matched in the script, because right at the beginning you have the first words of the film are a monologue from Mark. And then the very end you have Rashida Jones telling Mark what he is.
Yes.
So you have her dictating to him. So you've had this... His speech has been condensed in the way that, like you said, his form has been condensed and the light has been condensed and everything has shrunk for Mark by the end of the film.
And I think it's notable that, you know, that the start, the very first scene is in a rammed pub. You know, it's absolutely rammed, and the early scenes are him in lecture rooms or in his dorm room, and it's very, very busy, and it just gets emptier as the film goes on. It gets emptier and emptier and emptier, and the final scene, the final flashback scene, is when Sean Parker gets done for drugs and possibly underage sex, possibly. And the shot is literally of Mark in the office as the cleaners are turning the lights off. And he just gets...
and you have... I know you hate Christopher Nolan films, but there's that exact same switching the lights off in sectors that you get in the Dark Knight films. That sort of closing down, the very visual closing down that Christopher Nolan will do. I mean, you have that same thing with the cleaners leaving the building, leaving Mark alone.
And it throws back to, I mean, a very different sort of film, but sort of Conan the Barbarian. And even something like Pitch Dark, when your hero, or whoever sees himself a hero, becomes king, he's bored. You know, he very much get the feeling that Mark Zuckerberg exists as this kind of like rebellious, fighting the system kind of character, at least in his own mind, that he's this undeserved, unsung hero. And when he becomes the deserved, completely sung about hero, how do you deal with that? How do you move on? And
yeah, he wants those cars that say "I'm CEO, bitch." But once he has them, he thinks, "Well, okay, I've got that now.
exactly.
Where do I go from here?"
And
I don't actually want the reality.
I think that explains his clear sort of puppy love obsession with Sean Parker in the film. That Sean Parker is this permanent outsider. He is the original rebel in that kind of technological scene, and there's that obsession with him. And you get the moment when you realise in that scene when they turn the lights off that he realises that Sean Parker is just as empty and as needy as anybody else.
And then you have, after that, or just before it's around the time of that flashback, you have Rashida Jones saying to Jesse Eisenberg, "What happened to Sean, Mark? What happened to Sean after this episode?" And there's a very telling silence. Because you know that Mark has cut Sean out.
Yes. So I think I think the film does a lot of clever things with its framing and its silencing. I think some people won't like it because it does deal with political things and it deals with generally unpleasant characters every step of the way. But I think from a filmmaking point of view, it's great.
I think that's why people won't like it, is just because people are generally unpleasant.
So Sam, as always, some further reading based on this week's film. Yes.
Well, neither of my films... Well, indeed, I mentioned House of Cards earlier, and that wasn't much to do with this. Neither of my films are particularly to do with this at all, subject-wise, or even actors-wise. The first one is just because Jesse Eisenberg is so good as Mark Zuckerberg. Then I said right at the beginning how maybe it was a testament to how good he was, how I felt this film maybe didn't need to be made. But I would compare another actor who is brilliant at playing real people, and he's done so many, many times. The film I would suggest is The Damned United, with Martin Sheen as Brian Clough, which was fairly famous story of Brian Clough's 44 Days at Leeds United, was turned into a book, which is I hate I hate it when people say, "Oh, I know you don't like sport, but you will love this." Well, like, if you don't like sport, you're not going to like a film about the sport, however psychologically driven it is. So, if for a sports fan, the book of the true story and then the film of that book are both very good. I'm not sure they're your thing if you don't like sport, but they are. From my perspective, I love that, and I love how different the film is from the book. And the book is one of my favourite books, and the film is one of my favourite films, and they are entirely different. Those two are true for entirely different reasons.
Cool.
My second one is the first time I believe we have mentioned on this podcast the film which indirectly gave the podcast its name. It is the film Prestige, which is, I believe, the only Christopher Nolan film that Rob will countenance.
That's not entirely...
Oh no, you're all right. you're all right with Inception, aren't you? Yeah, okay.
It's mainly the Batman's I'm not a fan of.
Okay, right. The Prestige had the same ideas about a dispute, and it becomes not really about the issues involved, but about what certain people are prepared to do for the sake of certain causes and what they're prepared to do to other people in their lives. I think I'll leave it as that, because it's a film you really need to go and see if you haven't.
Well, I've gone the opposite direction. My films are very linked and weirdly interlinked themselves, and the lead actor in both of them is Michael Douglas, which was entirely unintentional until I kind of pulled them both up on IMDb and thought, how strange. So my first one is from the same director as Social Network, who is probably my favourite director of all time, David Fincher. And this is his 1997 film, The Game, starring Michael Douglas and Sean Penn. Michael Douglas is a wealthy sort of business finance person who is given a gift by his brother of The Game, which is a strange mix of real world events that you're never entirely sure what's fake, what's real, who's on what side. Is it a game, or has he discovered a conspiracy? And it's very... nothing you see you can take for granted as being true. It's, certainly from my experience with Dave Fincher, it's my first films that got me into him, and it's kind of the birth of his films that are obsessed with truth and what truth is and what is true. From here he's gone on to do things like the Zodiac, which deals with the Zodiac killers in America. I just think this is...
Zodiac, which I loved, actually, although it's a film... It's a particularly depressing film.
Very much so.
And doesn't really have a resolution of any sort, but I love the film Zodiac.
And I think that
was really
I
good.
suppose The Game is one of those films that, by David Fincher, is often forgotten in sort of the heyday of Seven and Prestige and Prestige Network, but I absolutely adore it. I think more people should see it. Secondly,
okay.
I'm following on from the writer, because the writer of Seven Network is Aaron Sorkin, who infamously wrote West Wing. He wrote that sort of Studio 60 and Sunset Strip. He wrote those kind of things. And this is a film by him called The American President from 1993, which sensibly is a rom-com about the president who starts dating Annette Bening. It is funny, it is sweet, but it's also about truth and portrayal of what is true and how perception is everything versus what is real. And it basically stars almost everybody from the West Wing before they're in the West Wing. And I just think it's a great film that often everyone forgets exists. And I wanted to put it in as a recommendation based on the writer. Because I think that the strength of writing that he brings, which can be hit and miss if you watch some of his stuff, is on top form here and in Network.
Brilliant.
So Sam, next week.
Yes. Next week. Next week, I would like to watch the film Girl Interrupted.
Oh.
Following on from film based on a truth, maybe this is a film based on a book. And whether it's true or not is a debate. But it's an interesting one to think about, I think, in terms of films based on other sources. So that's the one for next week.
Oddly enough, I own that on VHS. I have owned it on VHS since it came out on VHS, and I've never watched it.
Well, let's watch it now.
I have it on DVD as well, so I'll watch that. But yes, excellent.
Okay.
But guys, if you want to find us online, you can come find us on Twitter. We are at Prestige Podcast.
If you want to find just me, I am at life_academic.
And I am at Rob Kaiju.
Thanks, guys, and look forward to sharing more films with you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
The Prestige is a Kaiju Industries production. Check out their other work at facebook.com/Kaiju Industries. Rawr! Arg.